Hello and welcome to the Reuse Company webinars. You will be muted during the webinar, but we will have some time for Q&A, so you can write down your questions in the question section during the whole presentation. The webinar will be recorded, and in a few days we'll send you the link to the recording. Today's topic is meeting ISO 13485 requirements on design and development inputs by applying AI technology. Today's presenters are Fröling from the Reuse Company Scandinavia, and we are very excited to also have Peter Sebelius from Medical Device HQ with us. My name is Cecilia Karlsson, and I will be the host. We will start with a short introduction to the companies and the presenters. Then Peter will talk about requirements characteristics according to ISO 13485. After that, Christo will do an introduction to the SES Engineering Studio, and he will show us different use cases with SES Engineering Studio. Finally, we will have some time for Q&A. So a couple of words about the Reuse Company. We are a tool vendor specializing in the application of semantic technologies and artificial intelligence to improve the digitalization of engineering processes. And Christer Fröling is the CEO of the Reuse Company Scandinavia. He has over 2 decades of experience in successful implementation of systems engineering. Okay, so I hand over to Peter now.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Cecilia, for the introduction, and thanks for having me on this webinar. So I'm Peter Sebelius. I'm the CEO and founder of Medical Device HQ, which specializes in delivering courses to the medical device industry, and more specifically, bringing medical devices to market in the most efficient way. I'm a member of the technical committee authoring the ISO 13485 and ISO 14971, and has therefore been involved in the international group that wrote the latest versions of those 2 standards. I would be super happy to connect with anyone who attends this webinar on LinkedIn, so please do look for me there, Peter Sebelius on LinkedIn, and make a connection request if you want to. I will be happy to accept that after the webinar. So what does Medical Device HQ do? A little bit more than what I just said. Well, there's a full range of courses available on the medicaldevicehq.com website. So if you ever have any need for onboarding new employees, or want to learn more about requirements engineering, which is very closely related obviously to the topic today, there's a unique course on that on medicaldevicehq.com. So don't hesitate to go there and see what's available for you on that website. So let's get started. In this session, I will be showing you how to write unambiguous design and development inputs and how to meet ISO 13485 requirements on design and development inputs. And everything that I'm presenting is coming from that course that I just mentioned on medicaldevicehq.com on requirements engineering for medical devices. So is this important, really, this topic? Well, in my experience, and this is really, really sad, I think, many medical device companies are working with requirements not because they see the value in it, but because they have to. And this is a general problem in the medical device industry. Too many organizations do what is required without knowing why and without seeing the value. It's compliance above quality, you could say, which is a really sad and odd way of looking at things. So in this session, I'm hoping that I will be able to convey the value of this, and we will therefore maybe be able to go beyond compliance and see the point in doing these things. And it is obviously super important. Another symptom of this is that when I teach design controls, I often ask if participants have been involved in writing requirements, and most would say, yep, they've been part of that. And then I ask how many of you have formal training in requirements engineering. What do you think happens? Well, it gets very silent, actually. It's very rarely anyone. It's probably less than 5 to 10% that says that they have any training in this field. And I'm not referring to read and understood of the procedure for design control. I do not consider that to be training, actually. But this is a critical task if you want to be successful with product development on medical devices. But not only that, if you don't know what you're doing in this area, it also creates lots of frustration and then you're wasting time. And that's one of the reasons a lot of companies are coming to me. They say, we have endless discussions on what's right or wrong in this area, or where to store or archive or record the requirements. It's a constant pain, where there is usually a huge potential for improvement. So one of the reasons why training is rare in this area is because if you turn to requirements engineering training courses or books or standards, they are written for software and very rarely for physical products, and even less so for medical devices. So that was one of the backgrounds why I created this course. Now, I'm going to switch from complaining about the current state of affairs when it comes to requirements engineering in the medical device industry and talk about what design and development inputs should be like. So let's say that you identify a user need, which is that the device shall be sterile. Based on that user need, you write one or several design input requirements, which is very similar to the user need, because this user need is basically already a design input requirement. The design verification is to validate the sterilization process. There will, however, be a problem when you get to the design validation, because how can you prove that the XMED device is sterile by using it in an actual or simulated use condition? And more specifically, why sorry, let me go back to that one. This is one of the many problems that you see when you try or when you get the requirements in wrong buckets. So let's look at how we can structure that in a better way. And one way to do that is to go back to what the ISO 13485 requires. It says that design and development input characteristics according to ISO 13485 should be complete, unambiguous, able to be verified, able to be validated, and not in conflict with each other. So what do these things mean? Well, there isn't any more information in the ISO 13485 nor in the ISO 9000 series of standards, and you have to look elsewhere to find what these terms mean. And I think there are mainly two sources of information that you should look for if you want to understand these terms. One is the INCOSE guidelines on writing requirements, and there is an IEC standard that includes requirements on how to write requirements. Now, INCOSE is an abbreviation of International Council on Systems Engineering, and INCOSE has a lot of valuable resources relating to writing requirements, but they are not medical device specific. So if you want more medical device specific information, you can look at that during this webinar or attend my course in the future on requirements engineering. The interesting thing is that the terms complete, unambiguous, able to be verified, and able to be validated are actually also found in the INCOSE guideline. It's not specifically mentioned, the last one, when not in conflict with each other, but it's sort of embedded in another characteristic, which is called consistent in the INCOSE guideline. So here we can get some guidance from the INCOSE guideline on what these terms mean. And I put together the characteristics in the INCOSE guideline, and you can see them on the top here for individual needs and requirements, and then sets of needs and requirements. To achieve these characteristics, the INCOSE guideline has no less than 41 rules. And I know Christo, he merges a few of them and says, well, some of them are so similar that they could be treated as one. And I would agree to that. But there are 41 rules that you should meet to achieve all the characteristics mentioned in the INCOSE guideline. Now, what I've done is that I have put together a formula in this spreadsheet on the right-hand side, which shows which rules we need to take into account if we want to achieve the characteristics that are mentioned in the ISO 13485. And the orange colored highlights here shows the characteristics from the ISO 13485. And you can see here on the right-hand side that there are quite a few rules that we need to take into account. In fact, there is no less than 36 of the rules that we need to use to create or achieve the characteristics of ISO 13485, what's required from design and development inputs. So what are these rules like? Well, let's look at a few of them just to get them more tangible. One rule is that the design input requirement should form a complete sentence. And in this case, the simplest sentence would be in this form with the subject, verb, and object, meaning that you shouldn't write requirements like bullet points. Instead, write, for example, that the XMED device should weigh, or shall, I should say, shall weigh less than 10 kilograms. When writing stories, pronouns are useful for avoiding repetition of nouns, but when writing needs and requirement statements, pronouns are effectively cross-references to nouns in other needs or requirement statements, and as such, they are ambiguous and should be avoided. And here you can see one such example. The requirement says that when the XMED device is connected to the ventilator, it shall confirm the connection with audio signal. And it is the noun in this requirement. And the question here is obviously, is it the XMED device or the ventilator that should confirm with an audio signal? That is not clear, is it? So here the pronoun makes it ambiguous. And the better way of writing it would be to say, when the XMED device is connected to the ventilator, the XMED device shall confirm the connection with audio signal. It's almost like a programmatic coding approach to writing things. A last example of the 36 rules, and obviously there are many more, as you know, is that all numbers should have units of measure explicitly stated in terms of the measurement system. So don't just refer to, for example, degrees, as in this example, because that could be Kelvin, Celsius, or Fahrenheit. And so make sure you include the full unit. Is this, I mean, it might seem obvious, or you might even think, is that really that important? But I do have a story to share with you on that, because when the Mars orbiter crashed on Mars in 1999, it was the result of the propulsion engineers at Lockheed Martin not converting metric the US pounds to metric newtons, even though that was the standard to do, and the calculations then got wrong and the orbiter crashed. So my advice to you is, don't be the next one that crashes a spacecraft because of making this mistake. So what do I think you should do about all these things? Well, I think you should create a requirements authoring guide, a document that says this is how we write user needs and design input requirements. Actually, I think it's worthwhile defining both those two, and they are quite different. And include maybe not all 36 or 41 rules at once, but just if you include a number of them, you're going to get really far and see improvements in the quality of requirements. Another thing that I think you should include in this writing guide would be patterns, and I'm going to bring up what they are. You could say that a pattern is a template or a boilerplate with slots where you fill in relevant words to create a requirement, and Krista is showing that, I believe, in a little later today, where you input words that forms a requirement. And I will show you what that could look like. So here is a user story pattern, and user stories are used very often in agile development and software development, but this type of pattern is also very useful when it comes to user needs. It's made up of a who, what they want to do, and that would be the what, so that why, or what they want to achieve, or the benefit that they want to achieve, or sometimes what they want to avoid. And if you apply this pattern, you could get a user story like this. As a nurse, I want to see the patient's temperature for the preceding 30 minutes so that I know if something happened to the patient. That's great. The nice thing with the user stories in this way is that you reduce the risk of someone expressing requirements on the product, which you should avoid in a need statement. It should more talk about what the users want to do. That also facilitates the validation much, much better. So that's a very useful advice, I would say. Now, there are many different types of patterns for both needs as well as requirements. We just looked at user stories, and you can see a long list of other types of patterns here. The one that I'm going to be focusing on now would be EARS, which is the easy approach to requirement syntax, and bring up a few examples of what that is. So if we take design input requirement patterns, the simplest one is like this: the entity or subject shall, and we have an entity response, and this could be quite broad because you could fit in a lot of things in this one. One example would be to say that the so-called device shall weigh less than 8 kilograms. This would be a good example of that. But please note that this is always on. It doesn't say that when it's loaded or filled up or primed or anything. It just says that it shall weigh less than 8 kilograms. So this does not work so well if we're talking about functional requirements, such as when a button is pressed, the device should do this or that. So that's where EARS come back to us and come into play, because EARS has a number of patterns that you can use in conjunction with events or different states or even unwanted behaviors. And we have examples of that here, the event-driven one, when the escape button is pressed, the so-called device shall show the home screen, for example. Or while the safety button is engaged, the biopsy needle gun shall prevent the needle from being fired. And we also have an example of an unwanted behavior. If the so-called device leaks more than 50 milliliters of water inside, then the so-called device shall shut down. And this is almost like writing code. Again, actually, it's quite useful because in some cases where you write the requirements really properly for an embedded software or software as a medical device, you can actually use the requirements almost like a framework for the code. So that's super useful. So I said that it's useful in all cases, particularly in software products. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to bring up a few examples of what requirements should not be like, and how you should write them to meet ISO 13485 requirements on design and development inputs. And let's start with this here. The XMED balloon catheter material shall be manufactured using polyethylene 80. And what could be the problem with this one? It looks like a requirement, right? But the problem with this one is that it's not a design and development input, it's an output. This is actually a design output. So what you should have done is to place this requirement on the drawing, more or less, not on in the product requirement specification. So instead, maybe the design input requirement should have been that the XMED balloon catheter material shall have a tensile strength of at least 28 megapascals, or there is even a better one. The XMED balloon catheter shall have a burst pressure of at least 0.2 megapascals. Then the design engineers would select polyethylene based on this requirement and others that apply. And I see this mistake the whole time when reviewing requirements for medical device manufacturers. Both large and small manufacturers, they make this mistake over and over again. And it's a quite serious one, because basically what you're saying here is that if polyethylene was no longer manufactured, you don't have a medical device anymore, right? If it was a design and development input and polyethylene is the solution, if it goes away, you don't have a medical device. And that's probably not the thing. There are other materials that are equivalent to polyethylene that you could be using. So try to get that sorted out. Also, this problem is common. People write up like dimensions and things on the product that are really not design inputs, but rather design outputs. So here's another requirement. The software system shall not allow external users to access the patient information. And the problem with this one is that it includes a negative. It says not allow. This should be avoided. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions to this rule, but in this case, it's particularly important to avoid the word not. And I will tell you why in a second. The way you can improve this negative requirement is to say that the software system shall only allow employees to access the patient information. And this is an improvement because in the previous bad example, you are excluding one particular group, and that's the external users. But in theory, all of the other groups you could think of would be allowed to have access to the patient information. So if you say, for example, oh, the service technicians, then if you do not put them in the external users or internal, you might not be sure, in theory, they could have access to the patient information. And that was probably not the intent. But by saying only allow employees, you've restricted it. So that's a much better way of writing this requirement. What you can do when you have a not in your requirement and want to avoid that, you could sometimes work around it by using words like only or prohibit or limit. That makes it better or more in accordance with the rules, and therefore you would achieve an unambiguous requirement. So now an interesting question for you, those of you who are really concerned about conformity with requirements or compliance. Would an auditor be likely to notice this or have an opinion about this? Probably not. Should they know it? Yes, I think so, but they usually don't. There are other things that they will react to, however, and I will show you these examples as well. So here's another bad example. The XMED device shall have as low weight as possible. What does that mean? As low as possible. Remember that the purpose of requirements is to ensure that all stakeholders have a common understanding of what's going to come out of your product development process. So here, it leaves it open for lots of different interpretations. And I know one thing, the engineers are going to think that as low weight as possible is a lot less than the people that are going to try to market and sell the device. There's going to be a huge difference, right? So this should be removed and replaced with a better wording where you decide, and what the weight should be. So, for example, the XMed device shall weigh less than TBD kilograms. And yes, to be determined, the abbreviation here. You may use that until you basically get to the design verification. But you have to put it in there before you start verifying your design outputs. You can't do it retrospectively. So, but for a while, you can have it like this. Now, if you want to see more examples of escape clauses, I have a recommended read. And now you might think that I'm going to point you to some kind of guideline or published article, but I'm not. I'm going to refer you to the medical device regulation. You might be aware of section 2 in the GSPR, which is about reducing risk as far as possible. There you have not one escape clause, but a long list of them, because the authors of the MDR managed to squeeze in no less than 7 variations of the escape clause. So not only did they create an escape clause, they made the requirement inconsistent, which should also be avoided. So if you want to see a good example or on how not to do it, look in the MDR. And here you have the list: reduced as far as possible, reduced to the lowest possible level, reduced as far as possible and appropriate, and so on. It's unbelievable that they managed to do that when they could have used one phrase instead throughout the whole MDR if they now were going to have a escape clause. So here's another example. The XMed system shall be able to operate for more than 3 hours. What's the problem here? Well, the problem is that it includes superfluous words, namely be able to. These words do not add any value to this requirement, right? You can just remove them. The XMed system shall operate for more than 3 hours. Then you know what the requirement should be. In fact, this be able to could even be misleading, because you could read it as if you manage to make it run for 3 hours under the optimal conditions, you've met the requirements, right? Because it was able to. But really, the intent of this requirement is more likely to be that it should always be able to operate for more than 3 hours. So try to remove those words, and they are super common. So I'm sure you can find them somewhere in your own product requirement specifications. What you should have done is just to remove it. Then it's done. So remove any unnecessary words. Here is another one. Let's see if you can spot the problem here. The XMed device must be able to output a flow of 100 milliliters per minute. If we follow the principle that we brought up with the previous requirement, we should remove the be able to, because those words are superfluous. So we can agree on that. But there is one more issue, and the question is if you can see it. The problem is that 100 milliliters per minute is not specific enough. And by that, I don't mean that you should say 100.000. I mean that the R&D engineers wouldn't know if it should be at least 100 milliliters per minute, not more than 100 milliliters, or plus minus 2 milliliters per minute. The requirement is missing a tolerance. And this is something that the auditors would be able to react to. They would look at that and say, well, you don't have any acceptance criteria. So instead, the XMed device shall output a flow of at least 100 milliliters per minute. That would be much better. Now you have the acceptance criteria, and it doesn't open up to interpretations of what that 100 milliliters per minute means. So now we're meeting ISO 13.5 requirements again on the design and development inputs. So previously, I said that medical device professionals often miss training in this area. This is also true for the notified body auditors. Thus, they are not likely to detect several of the issues that I presented to you so far. However, this particular mistake, they are going to react probably, and they might also react if you do escape clauses, because they're going to say, well, that's a subjective requirement. So some of these things they will react to, not all. That doesn't mean you shouldn't implement the rules, obviously, but it's just that you can see some things are less likely to result in a non-conformity, but rather than a problem in the product development. So here is another poor requirement, and that is that the XMed device is connected to the compressor. It shall produce less than 35 decibels sound measured at 1 meter in front of the device. What's the problem here? Well, it has a nice precondition, as you can see, and I'm using ears here. Why the XMed device is connected to the compressor? Well, there are two problems. It includes a noun, or a pronoun, it. We shouldn't have that. But there is one more thing. There is not a tolerance on the there is not a tolerance on the 1 meter in front of the device. Could be discussed whether that is a problem or not here. Maybe you should add and say 1 meter plus minus something. But there is the pronoun, which is the main issue with this one here. So a better version would be to repeat it and say, while the XMed device is connected to the compressor, the XMed device again shall produce less than 35 decibel sound at 1 meter distance in front of the device. So this requirement was not really complete in the way it was. So that was a number of mistakes that are often done in this area. I'm not going to be bringing up more of them now, but instead hand over to Krista, who will show you a little bit more on how software can help you with things relating to this, not only the quality of the requirements, but also tracing requirements and a few more things than that. So Krista, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Peter. And I must say that I've seen and I've attended your training, and I must say that it's a very good one. So I do recommend it very much.
Thank you.
So here are some brief introductions to our toolset called the Systems Engineering Suite, or SES. Basically, when we come up with the idea is to take care of the V model, if you have heard about that, meaning that you have a lot of different things going on, and they need to be coherent and they need to fit together. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to verify your system against your requirements, and you need to validate it against the needs. So it fits very well with what Peter has been talking about. But I do agree also with Peter's statement that many organizations are very immature when it comes to requirements, but also systems engineering, meaning the broader picture. And they are many times work dispersed. They perhaps have partners doing some parts, and they have large organizations. So they work in a stovepipe manner. They have little or less focus on knowledge management, which is required when you want to do this properly and have a high degree of quality in what you're doing. And I'm not meaning the quality of the product, but I'm meaning the quality of your work products. For instance, the requirement that Peter was showing you have a poor quality. And there are probably multiple tools involved. It's not just one tool involved when you do complex development like a medical device. And if you follow the ISO 15288 technical processes for lifecycle management, you see that they are talking about many different technical aspects, which probably are covered with different tools. So there are probably also no or little tool interoperability, meaning that you have to do copy paste, you have to do manual transformations, you have to do, printouts and stuff like that, and it can increase a lot of errors. Which also means that when a project is done, you start a new one, you probably have a less degree of information sharing and information reuse than you might want to. And in this example, I will use Peter's notions of user needs, but I put them in a Word document because that was what the organization was doing. I put all the design input requirements in an Excel sheet, so I can add a lot of information there. And when it comes to the design input, I'm thinking that the hardware development people, they're using their tools, but they want to communicate with us through a product breakdown structure, which they actually put in PowerPoint. So we need to manage not only that, but also the traceability, meaning that if the hardware people change something, we need to know if the requirements are affected and basically if it affects the user needs, and vice versa, of course. So we will look into traceability later on in this demonstration. The System Engineering Studio is actually a framework of different aspects and different functionalities. For the majority of the things I will be showing today is regarding quality and traceability. So we have a quality studio which manage all the things, for instance, the INCOSA guideline that Peter was talking about, the rules that there. We have authoring tools that helps you do the right editing of requirements on the fly. In the background, we have a knowledge manager or an ontology, meaning that we always can use natural language processing and basic AI techniques to help people getting better. For instance, spotting inconsistency and incompleteness, which is very hard when you just review one requirement after another. And then we have traceability. I will not talk about verification and validation studio, which means that you can set up a proper verification and validation project to ensure that that you capture all the aspects of verification and validation and ensure consistency when it comes to acceptance. And we also have a plugin for Microsoft Word, which I will not look into today. So the core of this, of course, is that we need to look into the information that you guys are writing. So we are constantly looking into adding more and more tool set to our framework so that we can assist you creating a digital and seamless flow of information. And also we would like to provide KPIs so you can see where are you, how good are you done, are you not done when it comes to project management. Traceability, of course, configuration and change management. If something changed somewhere, you would like to keep an order of that. I will show you that briefly because you don't want to lose track on where you are, right? Then we'd have knowledge management, and the future capabilities will be more on the decision management side, where we can start to compare things. We can start to develop KPIs based on different metrics, but that's on its way. Risk management will be added, and product line engineering, where you want to keep track on which requirements are involved in which version and variant of your products, so you can ensure a product line engineering approach. Briefly, some words on the ontology or the knowledge manager. First of all, you have to use a known vocabulary, for instance, English, Spanish, German, Swedish, Norwegian, or whatever language you have. You start there. Then you add your domain language, like we will see in this example, balloon catheter or so cool is a word which will be used, so it needs to be recognized. We will talk a little bit about patterns. Peter has introduced those. We use them both for editing, but also for analysis purposes. When you have 1, 2, and 3, you can start to formalize, meaning that we can look on different types of information and start to compare them, even if it's a picture compared to text and vice versa, or whatever we want to do. Now we are talking artificial intelligence. We can start to reason if things look inconsistent or incomplete compared to a single source of truth that you have defined, which is basically the ontology and its connectors. So now I will perform some brief demos of some use cases that I've been defining. The first one is that I will show you different connectors. I will basically open the Microsoft Word. I will open the product breakdown structure from the hardware people in PowerPoint, and I will also open Microsoft Excel sheet where I have all my design input requirements. And I will do a brief quality analysis of those requirements, the design input ones, because we want to check the quality, and I want to show you how you can prepare a report. So this is the SES. We will look into quality, traceability, and a little bit about reporting. The rest I will leave for hopefully a next demo. Here are the connectors I would like to open. You can see that we also can connect to PDFs. So if you want to trace standards, if you're allowed to trace to standards, you can select also standards to trace to, for instance, to see if something will affect the standard or vice versa. So here's the Excel sheet. And I've actually got the requirements from Peter, so I've chopped them up. So I put the yellow parts in one Excel sheet, the blue parts in PDF, and the gray one I've put in the connection to the Word document, and we will look into that. So briefly, this is the information from the PowerPoint. So I'm not interested in the PowerPoint or the picture itself, but the information. So I'm extracting the information from there. So we will start to compare if we actually are using those wordings, which is important when it comes to validating the product, that you're using the correct terminology. I will come back to that a little bit. So, and apart from that, I can show you this is the user needs. We will not look into them more than just briefly, but you can see that they come from a Word document, which can include a lot of different information, but we are parsing the requirements in this case. And I've been adding some attributes regarding the validation to keep track on future validation of the user needs. So let's take the prime suspect, the design input requirements, and perform a brief analysis of those. And when we are talking about analysis, of course, we can work on the analysis using different attributes or columns, as you see here. But I want to perform an analysis where we actually are looking into the semantics, and we can change and we can add the information in the status and different aspects like that. But right now, I'm interested in keeping track of the quality. And when we talk about the quality, of course, we have to decide what to analyze and do an analysis against. And I've created a basic set of rules. You heard that Peter said that there can be multiple of them. I've chosen 18 here. And I usually say that you shouldn't start with more than 10 because the organization is rather slow. You better find the worst ones and then add later on. And you can always add a lot of different metrics depending on different things that you would like to look into. And you have to define the quality level per metric. We'll be talking about 1, 2, and 3 stars, and you see them below. And I also added some metrics related to the traceability, so we can see that. But basically, I want to cover what is mentioned in ISO 13485 from my perspective. So if I want to do analysis, well, I need to save my change first. Okay, so I'm saving it. I changed the status, as you saw briefly when I went through it. So let's do a quality analysis now. Here are the requirements. And I'm going to measure the quality. I'm going to measure what I call the correctness, where I have all my metrics. I'm not looking into inconsistencies and incompleteness right now. You see 1, 2, 3 stars here. We will go through them in more detail later on. And here I can see all the issues. You saw that Peter was mentioning a lot of them, but this might or will save you a lot of time, and it will be very repetitive. So you can't cheat, and you will not miss anything. Then you have to decide what is right and wrong regarding the comments you have there, but at least you don't have to guess. Then you want to perhaps work with your requirements, and then you can keep track on where you are by saving different snapshots. So you hopefully see that you are getting better and better over time. And I just want to show you here that you can also create a report, which means that you can take this aside, take a cup of coffee, start to look through your requirements, and start to identify what you should work on from here. So that was the basic first session I would like to show you. The next information I would like to show is actually where we change to the content view or the editing view, where you actually now see the information, the quality information. So let's look into the next use case. I will start to change some requirements. I will continuously working on the Excel sheet. I will change some requirements, and I will use what we call a RAT, the requirements authoring tool, the editor, that can give me inline assistance when I'm doing the work. So let's look into this. Here are the requirements. I have the quality. There are some subjects, not approved design elements, which means that I shouldn't be able to pass the validation of this, in this case, the so-called device. I've been starting to adding status. We have the verification and acceptance criteria, which we can work with in parallel. So let's look into this. The subject is not an approved design element. Okay, meaning that it doesn't fulfill what I had in my PowerPoint. But I know that it's now called so cool. So probably this was called X device because it was created before somebody at marketing decided it should be called so cool. So now it's fine. But I need to stay consistent. Let's take another one. This is probably Peter's favorite. The balloon catheter shall be manufactured using polyethylene 80. Okay, and there's a lot of things. And I can continue working there, but I can also open the editor. And I will see that I will have a lot of different things. It's a passive voice requirement, so I have the wrong subject. It's an illegal design input. Oof, what does that mean? Incorrect spelling. Subject isn't approved. Okay, so I know that it's misspelled, so I'm changing that, but it's still passive voice and a illegal design input because shall be manufactured. Okay, for me it indicates that the balloon catheter cannot manufacture it itself, so is it really a design input requirement? Probably not, and it's also passive. So I should indicate that this needs to be looked into and probably changed. Perhaps it should be changed to something else or moved, as Peter said, but I'm saving that and I'm writing a comment to my colleagues that we need to look into this. Is this actually a design input? Is this, or is it a design output, something that should be written in another schema somewhere? And let's take the last version of change management that we can do when it comes to, or editing, I should say. The lung shall be kept moist. Okay, I can start to edit, but I can also start to use the patterns that Peter was talking about. And here I've been basically just using the simplest pattern that Peter was talking about, system, action, or verb, and object. So, okay, I will start to rewrite this. I'm probably not using misspelled words. And here I have the proper design input or the design elements. So-called device shall be kept. It should be active voice, so it should be keep, right? The lung, yeah, moist. Okay, and misspelling, correct that one. Yeah, thank you very much. And now I'm done, but it still indicates things. I need to remove the faulty information, and then I only have one thing left, and that's it's not traced. It's a good requirement, but it's not traced. So we will look more into that later on. So I'm saving it. I'm adding the new information, at least one outlink to a user need. I have no links to a user need. So let's look into that later on. That was use case number 2. Number 3, change management. If you have created a lot of requirements and you want to have a stable time where you can do meetings or reviews, you want to freeze a set of requirements. That's what we call when we create baselines. And then you would like probably to create baselines and compare with the older baselines or the current version of the requirements, so you see what has happened since last time. So that's what we are going to look into, and that's important from a configuration management aspect. So here we are. Here are all the requirements. We have been doing some change. Now we want to look into the configuration management and create the baseline, meaning that we are freezing all of these requirements because we will have a meeting now with some stakeholders that will look into this and decide what to do. I will basically just be looking at a couple of requirements by filtering them out, as you will see soon. So now we are creating a baseline for this, the information you see in the screen here, including all the attributes and everything, all the columns. And I want to filter out just a few set of those so that we could start to look into, okay, somebody is complaining about having, yeah, that's good. Okay, super good. Okay. Yeah, so that's good. So I could see the change. I can keep track of the changes, and that makes it easier for me to work with the requirements, right? Okay, that was that. And the next one is about traceability. When it comes to traceability, you know that we have been chopping up the information, meaning that if we have information in a Word document, in an Excel sheet, and in the PowerPoint, it means that we need to be able to keep track on changes between all the information. So I will be looking into one traceability module, meaning that one set of traces, and we will look more into that. So let's run this video. Here's the traceability functionality. I have created a couple of modules because I want to keep track on traces between the design input requirements and user needs, and also the design output and the design input, meaning that if something changes in that, I want to have an indication. Here we have traces, 44 traces in this case. And you remember that we have one requirement, the favorite polyethylene requirement. We still haven't decided if it's a proper design input, but we at least want to decide if we can find a user need for this one. Now I have to be looking into my design or my user needs to define if I have a proper trace. Yeah, I could find a trace there which I'm interested in, so I'm creating that trace. And that will solve that problem. I can also, of course, continue to work on my requirements to change some of them, because I want to see a couple of changes done here, so I can see how caps lock, I need to go back. Yeah, that's right. So now we have some changes. So let's also change some status on these ones. That not approved, it's modified. It's okay, let's save it, and let's look from a traceability point of view, meaning that if I start to look, is something affected by these changes I've just made? Let's evaluate these things from a traceability point of view. I find two suspects. Okay, so I need to find out, has my changes to the design input requirements, do they affect something? So perhaps the change cannot be made, or I have to do another type of change. Okay, here I have them. I would like to look into the details. I can see that the source has been changed, meaning the design input. And I've been changing, as you saw, the X to the so cool, and I removed the highly. So yeah, and the target, no, it's fine. So I can accept that change. It's so minor. And you could also develop a mechanism here that small changes can automatically be approved. For more complex things, you would like perhaps to look into the traceability tree or the graph to be able to see that the design input requirements for here is actually linked to two different user needs. One is not affected. The user need 4 is not affected, but the user need 3 is affected, but not that much. So I think I'm taking the decision to approve it. You could also look at it from a traceability matrix point of view, where you see the yellow X here indicates that you have to look on both sides. Or you could actually also develop a report, which I will show you later on that you can do. But I approve that one. So the changes I made to the design input requirement wasn't that grave, so I could actually approve them. Now the last one, which is the report generator. When you have the ability to connect to different sources of information, you would probably like to have dedicated reports showing different things. So we have an extensive report generator where you could create different types of reports. So here I would like to develop a kind of a traceability report. So that I can keep track on the traceability. So I can go into a word editor, and I add the different attributes and the different to the different layout. I will not bore you with all the details there if you're not interested. So here we have the document itself, or the template. So you assign a template to a connector, and then we can actually recalculate it, so we get the latest information, and that can be presented like this. So here we see the trace status, that it's all of them are consistent. We see that we have a target user need, and we have a source, which is the design input. So you can create different types of reports like that. And that was the last thing I wanted to show you. Hopefully you are interested, so you will contact me afterwards and we can do a more slow demonstration of this. But now over to the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter and Christer. So if you have questions for them, please use the question section. And while you're writing, I will tell you about our next webinar. Yes, this will be a short webinar, about half an hour, and the topic is ensuring consistency between textual requirements and models, the key to a successful systems engineering discipline. There are lots of guidelines showing us the way to write high quality requirements, as you know, but they usually don't cover the connections between textual requirements and models properly. So in this webinar, you will learn how to design a series of requirements quality rules that consider the information coming from models and how to implement this on top of any requirements management tool and any model-based systems engineering tool, thanks to the SES Engineering Studio. Okay, so time for Q&A. It seems that SES is quite potent, but has a lot of features and options. Is it hard to set up and learn?
I will say that you need to define your process first, and then we align the SES towards your process, and we define the different attributes. We absolutely, as Peter said, would like you to have a writing guide, including how you should use all the attributes, all the different columns that you saw, and what information to have there. But when you have that, including all the reports, then it's very easy to run, I would say. Good question.
Okay, this one maybe is for both of you a little bit. Do you need a software tool to manage the requirements?
I think you can take that, Peter.
Yeah, so I would say that for you always need a software, but I don't think I'm reading the question wrong, because I think you're going to put the requirements in Microsoft Excel or a similar spreadsheet all the time. That's probably the minimum. But then the question becomes if you need a dedicated requirements tool, and if you have a simple product with relatively few requirements, I think a spreadsheet is going to work just fine for you. But if you have a medical device with embedded software, for example, then you are very likely to need a tool. And the reason for that is that IEC 62304, the standard on software lifecycle processes, will require subsystems on software to be traceable to system requirements. So then you have user needs, system requirements, and subsystem requirements. And that traceability is going to be very difficult to achieve in a spreadsheet. Also true if you have a lot of requirements, like and again, software usually drives this. If you have a software as a medical device, or a medical device that is a software in itself, you could easily end up having 500 or 1,000 requirements. And when you start getting to those levels, again, a software tool is justified. So I would say it depends on the situation. For simpler products without software, maybe you can get away with spreadsheet. For more complex products, particularly if you have software, it's more likely that you will benefit from a software tool.
Yeah, and also from a collaboration aspect, it's hard to work in one spreadsheet. But I do
That's
agree
another
with
argument.
you.
Yes, you're right. The more collaboration you do, the more important it will be. So if you want to have a collaborative approach to writing the requirements, it's also very useful with the tool, because Excel, anyone could play with the text in Excel, and you don't know who changed what, which is also a problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, is this only available in Windows?
No, you could use it in different environments, but we should then discuss what are your environments. We're using Citrix clients and Thin clients and things like that, but now we are deeply technical, so we can answer you later on if you want.
Okay, what sources are possible? Only Word and Excel?
No, No. I briefly mentioned that we have a lot of connectors and we constantly evolve those. So right now it's 40 plus different tools that you can connect to SES. Word and Excel are easy ones, and they are commonly used in the medtech industry, as Peter was saying. But you can connect it to other types of requirements management tools or development tools and testing tools, of course. So no, many tools can be connected.
Okay. How is the tool validated?
The tool is validated through a different, typically standards for validating the product, so it's safe and secure. Then you have to validate that the data coming into the tool is correct, and that's another approach. So I'm not sure what type of validation you are talking about, but we can. But of course, the tool is validated, so it's safe and secure, and follow the ISO standards for that. But the data itself, it's another story. We usually do that. Yeah, sorry.
There is one thing also, and I believe your software is probably the borderline. It depends on how you do it, because if you print out everything in reports, you could argue that it's just like Word or Excel. If you do more advanced processing of the data within the system, then it has to be validated. But I could see this probably in some instances not requiring validation in the sense that when you refer to, I think it's section 4 in ISO 13485, that computer systems used in the QMS must be validated. This would probably be a borderline case in some instances.
Okay. Yeah, but of course, if we need to validate it towards a specific section and a specific use case and domain, of course that can be done. Of course.
Okay, thank you. How do you know that a requirement is able to be verified?
Yeah, may I answer that one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So my best advice is that if you have something that looks like a requirement traceability matrix or design input output matrix or whatever we call it, then whenever you write a design input requirement, you write 1 or 2 sentences about how you're going to go about proving that this requirement has been met. And keep in mind that verification is not only testing. You could do inspection, demonstrations, reviews, analyses, testing, which again is a subset of verification. And if you are struggling to write 1 or 2 sentences on how you're going to do it, then you should probably go back and revisit your design input requirement. But ultimately, in the medical device industry, you also have to validate your verification methods. So that should answer the question whether is the method that you have prescribed adequate with consideration to accuracy and precision and whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I can also add as a systems engineer that we always debate verification and validation because INCOSE talks about all work items should be validated and verified, meaning that from a requirement all the way to the system. So it depends on what type of verification and validation we are talking about. Validation and verification of requirement is that you are following your guidelines, then you can start to verify the requirement is good enough. Then you validate it against the user needs, against and against the different criteria you have there. But when it comes to the system, it's much more complex. So it depends on what type of verification and validation we are talking about.
Okay. Does the program have its own repository storing documents? If so, how are they protected from messy changes?
It depends on what type of tooling you have. If you're working in Word, for instance, we highly recommend that the Word document you're writing in is a copy, meaning that we are storing the data in ourselves. So what you see is a copy. Of course, we will track changes on the data which is not put into SES. So if you change the document, you change the picture, for instance, in the document, we will sense that and say it has been changed. But we are not a document tool taking care of everything. We are taking care of the data we are parsing into the tool itself. But depending on what different tools we are connecting to, you will see different approaches, because the tools themselves many times have different layers of protection and things like that. So you need to set up the chain properly and define where you are doing what, so you can create what we call a single source of truth, so that you really know what is real, what is stored, and what is a copy.
Mm-hmm. Are there any approval processes and thus assignment of role or permission level of user?
Yes. I didn't want to bore you with that, but you can assign different roles, and the different roles can be assigned different tasks, connectors, or even work items. So you can be very nitty-gritty, that one person can only go in and change one attribute, for instance, reviewing the requirement. Or one actor can just go in to one type of, they can only work with user needs, not the design input, and things like that. But now I have the full Monty, so I can show you everything, but it's quite extensive, the security mechanism around SES. And then that's basically because we are coming from the defense industry originally, and they are highly focused on security and safety when it comes to.
Which I also do, by the way.
Yeah.
I started my career in the defense industry.
Yeah. We all did. Yep.
Okay, so that was the last questions. We will finish here. Thanks a lot, Peter and Christer.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. If you have additional questions or want to receive information, don't hesitate to contact us. You can also find our LinkedIn information in the presentation. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.